more and more people coming in. Cool. Mexico, South Africa, Kenya, United Kingdom. That's where I'm also based right now. So this is great. Awesome. So we already have the Philippines. We already have a lot of different continents present, and that's really what it's all about, to really connect people from all over the world, young people to see Afghanistan. I see some people are using the chat. That's also fine. So we monitor both, but if you are able, please also use the Mentimeter as we have some questions for you later on for that. Awesome. So very welcome from all over the world where you are. It's really nice to meet all of you. And let's go to the next question we are having before I'm introducing you to our great panel we are having. Since this community is all about supporting young entrepreneurs, I was wondering, do you have any entrepreneur in mind who inspires you? I see someone has put already in the chat, Elon Musk. Okay. Do we get some more insights from the audience? People are thinking about it. Mark Zuckerberg, Gary Vee, Rihanna. Yeah, she has been super successful and it still is, I think, on the top of her career right now. Steve Jobs, your father, that's really nice. I hope you're maybe also be able to continue the legacy he has started. Royal Media Services. Awesome. So I see a lot of you already have quite inspirational role models to follow. And as we always want to hear from our community, to hear a lot of inspirational stories, lessons learned, and also guidance for others, I'm not here today by myself. I'm joined by a big team of experts, but also young entrepreneurs. So let's move on for these. Keep in the inspiring insights you're having. But for today, it's really my pleasure to welcome again a young entrepreneur. We're having Agnes and two experts from Sidley who will present to you more on the details of what you actually need to export. And thanks again for joining us today. So Agnes, you're running a social enterprise in Uganda in the textile and leather industry. Here I see you on the screen. Awesome. And while we dive into more questions on you, on your business, and especially on your export strategy, let's ask the audience at the same time if you have been already actually engaged in exporting. And while I start the conversation with Agnes, we leave it on the side so you have time to reply on the Mentimeter. But Agnes, yeah, how are you today? And can you tell me a little bit more about your business, how you actually started Arise Collection, and what inspired you to do so? Over to you.
Thank you, Milana. My name is Agnes Netunze from Uganda. I'm the CEO for Arise Collections Limited. We're a social enterprise business that manufactures leather and textile fashion products, handbags, shoes, jewelry, home decor items, and export them mainly to the US, but also globally. What inspired me to start Arise Collections was in my second year at university. I was looking for an internship placement, which was very hard to get. And I studied a bachelor's of procurement and logistics. And at the time when I was enrolling, I was told it is a hot course and I was going to get very good placements in very many multinationals. And I was very excited. But at the end, it wasn't as it was promised to me. And when it became so hard to find my internship placement, I stumbled on a very small company. It was called Seco, and they were just starting to make a few pairs. And we partnered together. I brought my procurement to the table, grew the business from just a small cottage business in a garage to a huge manufacturing unit in Uganda, from exporting just 10 pairs a month to exporting a full container. and the need to create more jobs for my own people from Uganda. And also we began to bridge the gap. So I come from Uganda, and in our education system, youth wait for 10 months from high school as you enroll into university. We wait for 10 months, idle, seated at home. And most girls don't make it through this program. They are married off, or they feel they are too big to go back to school. So we began to bridge the gap. How do we bring youth onto the table to utilize the 10 months in order to be able to catch up with university when it resumes after 10 months? Yeah, so that's our small journey why we started.
And that's really great.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Someone commented that I wasn't clear. I think
No,
I saw.
good. I was able to hear you very, very well. So maybe that's on their end. So thank you for sharing, and also inspiring to see how you grew your business already from like kind of like a very small one to a big one in exporting. And that's also really the topic of today, to kind of like give a bit of guidance and insights on how to reach there. So maybe a more specific question from your business, as it's more on fashion and building a brand, and distribution networks in foreign markets can actually be quite challenging, right? You might need to adjust your different strategies to the different contexts. So what strategies have you actually employed to establish a presence and create demand for your products abroad? And if you could dive in a little bit, what type of products are you actually working with mostly?
As a fashion small business, we knew we were not the first. Already there was fast fashion going on, the big brands, and we established ourselves, or we used the strategy of sustainable, ethical products. We produce our products from mainly natural raw materials that Uganda has to offer. We produce the best cotton. My sisters and brothers in Kenya can debate, but and we are an African country that has a lot of cattle rearing or animal rearing going on. And we realized that the beef industry is huge. And as long as people are still meatlicious, they love meat, that's how I call it, there will always be hides that either are going to end to the landfill. So we came to answer the point of, can we be the recycling part for the beef industry? And yes, when leather is tanned sustainably, it is a very natural raw material that is readily available in most African countries. So we produce handbags, shoes, clothes, jewelry. This is from cow horn. So if you've seen a cow, this is a cow horn item right here. And instead of having these items dumped and affecting our environment, we said, how do we bring them back to very good use? So we launched a strategy to making ethical products. That was one in identifying what we want to bring to the table as a fashion business. We also knew that the millennials and the Gen Zs are growing into accepting that their purchases matter. So we are tapping into conscious Gen Zs that are saying, my purchases matter, so I want to purchase ethically. And from there, we knew that we could use our own hands as Ugandan women to manufacture this product. So we use our hands to make, with a little bit of machinery, to make our products. So our products are handmade, and we pay a fair wage. So those are the strategies we put in place to say, how are we going to set ourselves apart from the many products that were on the market? Then the other thing, we also wanted to tell our own stories. If you realize big media companies, big documentaries are being written about Uganda, about Kenya, about your country, but are you part of that storytelling? So we said we are going to do that role with our products. So every product we make has a story. of the lady that made it, of the life that was changed. In our gap year program to date, we have more than 300 youth that have gone through our program, have gotten scholarships and enrolled into university. These are smart girls that would have been snatched away during the 10 months. Can they rewrite their stories? Can they let someone know that because of this, their lives were changed? With the suppliers we work with as well, we look into them having the process that matter to us. We cannot just pick a supplier. We find out that the supplier who's giving us hardware, are you paying your workers, whether men or women, a fair wage? What are the conditions they are working in? The leather guy who turns our leather, are you turning it sustainably and eco-friendly? And these are things that we are telling them to know about. And the end, we end up creating an ecosystem, starting from the farmer who's rearing that cattle or growing that cotton, to the person who's turning it into a raw material that Arise now uses in our factory to make a product, to finally our consumer who buys the bag. We still follow up and say, this product is sustainable. This is how you maintain it. This is how you keep it. And when you're done using it, this is how we recycle them back.
Awesome.
And
no,
that was in the production process. For the strategy of identifying ourselves as a global business, we realized that Ugandan business, we cannot do it alone. Partnerships are key, and collaborations are what we need more than competition. So we reached out to the countries that we wanted to export in. I've worked a lot with many Kenyan people. It's a second home to me. And before I opened my heart to going there and networking and finding people that I can work with, it was unknown. So we've created a lot of collaborations around the world. Currently, I'm not back home. I'm in the States, but I'm not on a vacation. I just came to network and meet the different people who sell our products in the different states. What can we do? Listening to what matters to them. When I was in UK, I was surprised to learn that the style and taste of our bags that worked so well in the US did not speak to my people in the UK. So we developed a strategy for them. When I went to Eastern Europe, they are into plant-based leather. We had to look for that. And right now we are producing bags from cactus leather. Who knew I would work all that? So collaborations has been one thing we put at the forefront. How do we collaborate with what Milana has? And we use it because it is not a one-man show, and we cannot keep reinventing the wheel.
No, definitely. You're here there for a long time, and I see you have done already very impressive work there to bring in people together, to really also do a good market study, as you say, to really identify, right, what are the customers asking for in the different countries. And I'm very happy that you actually also mentioned the sustainability aspect, as we are here in this Green Day series following Youth Day. And also in the other two sessions we already had on Youth Day itself, but also then the second one, which focused more on climate change and insurances around there, how many businesses and young people are really working towards these aims. What you also mentioned, finding new ways of making leather more sustainable, or finding maybe potentially, a greener solutions. So really cool to hear how important that also gets from the customer side, that there's a big demand on this, both on the EU and US market size. So maybe before we dive into really the logistics and the details, Anna and Diane will also tell all us about the EU standards and US standards you need to order to export. Maybe on one question regarding standards, Agnes, how did you, when you expanded to the different markets like the US or the UK you mentioned now, how did you keep up on managing the different standards you might have compared to your home country? Is there something you can share? Has this been challenging? How did you inform yourself about this?
It was really challenging in the start. One, beginning with the test standard. I would go in the market and buy fabrics that spoke to me as a Ugandan woman, and we would export them, and the market would be like, no, We're in fall, you're sending us summer colors. That was a first culture shock I encountered, knowing that the West has colors for each season. I'm like, okay. For the quality standard, it was also something we learned along the way. Like we really put our ears on the ground, understanding what do they look at as quality? What do they mean when they say they need a quality bag to look like this, a quality earring to look like this? Those are things we learned along the way when we were small. We relied more on reading and understanding the market and getting feedback. But as we kept growing bigger, we've now tapped into the ISO QMS standard, which is overall. So my team and I had to go through this intensive training. Everyone was brought on board, from the security guard at the gate to the lady who helps us to clean, because it is international. It touches on a very general point of view. So instead of me standing in my factory and say, this is how a quality bag should be, we have a procedure that everyone will understand. It's not, we are not using it because today I slept on the good side of the bed and the lady's teaching is having a good time. No, it is we have policies, procedures that we have developed along the way to make sure that we stick to the standard of the bag that we are making, so that if you're in the UK, you receive the same quality bag as someone in Kenya, as someone in Japan, as someone in the US. Those procedures have kept us going, and we go back and revisit them. They are not a one-time, set. We go back when times change, when we collaborate also with other bloggers and people in the fashion industry. And also we created a council where we have customers that have bought our products 8 years and above that sit on it. And these are our eyes on the ground. They're telling us, in UK, this can't even sell. In Serbia, this is really bad. So such committees and being intentional about that, this is what we want to promote, and also looking up to people that have done it. We are not the first. They already established brands that are sustainable and ethical, and they're larger than us. How do we learn from them is what we also tap into.
Yeah, no, learning is a big part of the journey, and we hear that multiple times, often, that you can actually learn so much from others who have already walked that way, right? Get some little tricks here and there, and also some guidance on how to actually, yeah, start your business or grow your business. And let me come to the close of our small conversation here. We have seen that a lot of the people in the audience are not yet exporting, only a little percentage. And today we want to give you a little bit of guidance and knowledge sharing on how you could actually start growing your business in this regard. Before I give the floor now to our Sidley experts, I wanted to give one last question to you, Agnes, and it's also for the audience, so all of you. What advice would you actually give to other young entrepreneurs in the gay community or in general who are aspired to actually expand their business internationally? What would you give them as a one recommendation? And at the same time, I really want to ask everyone to share kind of like your best knowledge, your best advice you have for your peers, so that we have a great wall of suggestions on how to do this. Over to you, Agnes.
There are a million questions I've learned along the way for the last 10 years. And one that sticks out is always understanding and knowing why you started. Why did you begin? If you're able always to come back to that why, it saves you a lot from when the business is failing. Those times I've been there where I want to walk away. It also saves you when it's booming and you're very excited, and it's easy to swerve away from, oh, now things are good. I think I can just, drop this. So to me, answering and remembering why we started in the first place has been very key for the business, and also for our customers, understanding them. That has also been key. Like, who are our customers? who do we want to serve? Yes.
No, great advice, Agnes. Also, I think this topic came up also from Oyun Garel at the beginning in our first session, to kind of like go back to your roots of like what is your internal motivation, to also stick with the basics sometimes, to not expand too quickly, to stay also mentally healthy when you kind of keep that motivation in you and know why you are doing this. And let me just read out what the audience also said is on what you promised. Um, Someone said the same thing. Remember why you do this. So Agnes, you have a fellow person here with the same opinion. Do your homework. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of basics you kind of need to have covered before you can really expand and grow. Find the purpose. Start lean. Yeah, don't have too many processes, people already from the beginning, and be determined. And then there's many much more coming in. It's really great to see. And also, I've learned to never stop learning in the chat. So everyone, thank you so much for contributing to this little exercise. And Agnes, thank you so much for sharing your story and giving us quite a lot of inspiration. So everyone, please give her a shout out in the with the emojis. Let the hearts come in. And I want to use this transition now to have Agnes kind of like an as inspirational young figure on what you can do if you expand your business also more to the US and the EU market. She was more on the fashion side today, as this has a lot of different rules and regulations in place. We will focus more on food and health standards, but we have here two experts from Sidley who will be able to give you way more details than I can do on this technical topic. So warm welcome to Anna and Diane from Sidley, who will guide you through this input. And Agnes, thanks again for joining. Feel free to keep being in the presentation today. And audience, if you have any particular question to Agnes directed, please put that in the Q&A function, and she will be able to reply. So over to you, Anna, and thanks again for joining.
Yes, thank you, Milena, and very impressive, Agnes. Thank you so much for sharing. There's no way that anything I will say now will be even remotely as interesting as what you just said, but I'll give it a try. So next slide, please. Welcome, everyone. So I'm speaking today with Diane. Maybe just a quick note on who I am, and then Diane can also introduce herself. So I'm Anna Mellon. I'm a German qualified lawyer working out of Munich for the law firm, the US law firm Sidley Austin. And I've been with Sidley for 7 years, focusing on advising medicinal product, medical device, and food companies, as well as cosmetics. And I help clients really with respect to the entire product life cycle. Diane, do you also want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. And I love the never stop learning, because I thought those comments at the end were fabulous. And as I listened to Anna, I actually continue to learn, even though I am a FDA regulatory lawyer and have been for over 26 years with Sidley Austin, and prior to that, another 7 years. So I've been doing this in this space for a long, long time. And we'll talk about a couple of different administrative agencies in the federal government that have touch points with some of the things that we've just heard, including the textiles, even though that's not FDA. So we look forward to the conversation, and I'll let Anna kick it off.
Thanks, Diane. Yes, so we will focus a bit, or my part of the presentation for sure will focus a bit on food, or I think Diane's as well. Next slide, please. We were asked also, I mean, in the spirit of this webinar series, to first give a little bit of a taste on what's going on with respect to sustainability, and then we'll give you some insight into food regulations in Europe and the US. So ESG is really a big topic. This slide is just supposed to illustrate first for you, and I'm sorry, maybe I should first say ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. I'll go into it in a moment. But this slide shows you litigation with respect to green claims and sustainability that we are tracking across our firm. So litigation anywhere in the world, and we've tried to kind of, categorize it a bit. And you might not be surprised to see that energy is the biggest sector. So in terms of what claims they are making with respect to sustainability, that's getting a lot of attention. Claims are being brought before courts to be challenged. But interestingly, given that today is about food a bit, the food and beverage sector is second. So we actually have we see a lot of litigation with respect to claims that food and beverage companies make. Next slide, please. So this is the spectrum of ESG issues. Europe is focusing on and making this a real topic on bringing litigation, which will highlight and enhance the standards with respect to environmental protection, social protection, and just governance in general. So, for example, you see under environment, addressing climate change and pollution, water usage, and on the social side, addressing human rights in the supply chain, labor standards. So over the next few years, there'll be more and more laws that address these points. Next slide, please. Here are some of the examples of the regulatory developments. So for example, there'll be certain disclosure requirements. In Germany, they already exist to a certain extent. There's already laws in force. So the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, you may have heard of before if you've dealt with European law. Very high up on the list of something you need to understand if you're operating in the EU market. And then, of course, relevant also especially to today, there's a green claims directive that is coming. So a focus on what are companies saying about their sustainability efforts, their them being green and good for the environment. And is that really so? And what are the standards that they need to apply to not mislead consumers? Next slide, please. And here I thought I'll just throw in a few examples to illustrate what I mean. And this is taken also from litigation, because a lot of these green claims being made about being green and sustainable, they're being, as I said, taken in front of courts and fact checked and pressure tested. And so here, this showcases a little bit the difference between Europe and the US that is still happening to date. Coca-Cola claimed, that they're creating a more sustainable and better future. So they had statements on Twitters and their website saying, we act in ways to create a more sustainable and better shared future. Scaling sustainability solutions and partnering with others is a focus of ours. And a US court held that these statements are vague and aspirational. Coca-Cola wasn't making any promises. And so the claims, the case was dismissed. In Europe, this would have likely gone a very different way in light of, all this legislation that is being passed in Europe. There's an expectation that companies do not make vague statements. General claims shouldn't make general claims. You should substantiate any claims you make. And under the EU Green Claims Directive, which is currently still a proposal, but coming, any claims about future performance, so something you endeavor to do in the future, must be accompanied by quantifiable and time-bound targets. So something to keep in mind. Another couple of examples, which you can also review later, I'll just quickly touch on now. So there's a company called Coolbest. It's a Dutch case from 2022. The company had claimed on the front of the packaging that they're now in a plant-based pack. And on the side of the pack, it stated also that it's a plant-based pack, 100% linked to plant-based materials and 100% reusable. But then that was brought before courts alleging that it was misleading advertising. And then during the proceedings, the defendant actually admitted that the packaging also contains aluminum. And so the complaint was successful. because for this statement to be used, plant-based packaging, it must be entirely plant-based, not just 90%, not just 95%. So this is setting the bar very high, ensuring that you don't mislead, that more and more consumers who are interested in buying sustainably really get what you claim is your package provides. Next, oh, sorry, that was supposed to be the next slide. Okay, again, next slide. So this was about Coolbest, yes. Climate neutral jam. Here we also had another company that claimed that its jam was climate neutral. And to make it short, the court ruled that if you claim that you're climate neutral, the average end consumer will assume very quickly, will judge that very quickly, read this message as they're buying the jam, and it needs to be product specific. So it's the jam itself needs to have been made in a climate neutral way. If it's not the jam you're referring to, but other offsets that are contributing to your company being more climate neutral, then you need to clarify that. Otherwise, you're misleading consumers. Next slide, please. So all of this is leading up to the EU Green Claims Directive in Europe. The litigation that we just saw is informing this directive, and is also, already, even though it's only a proposal, informing how companies are acting right now, and even how courts are interpreting this very subjective standard of misleading consumers. The EU Claims Directive, to be more specific, is, as I said, a proposal. It's expected to be enforced by 2026 in Europe. And here are some of the obligations, and I already kind of hinted on it. So you're going to need to have internal substantiation for any claim you make. You need to demonstrate through scientific evidence, that you can really make that claim. And as I mentioned, time-bound commitments. So if you're looking into the future, you're making claims about the future, make sure you set a time for it. Don't just say, you'll do something and that could be in 20 years. It should be at a certain point in time. Yeah, and bottom line really is make sure you can substantiate and verify the claims that you make. So we are starting to review for many different companies their claims, and we're asking, can you really say that you're more CO2 neutral, you've reduced your CO2 when, yes, you're using less plastic, but maybe because you're switching to paper-based packaging, you might need more land. So take that into consideration. Your internal documentation must take everything into consideration, reflect that you have considered your entire holistic impact on the environment. And as you can see here, of course, this directive will also have, ways of being enforced. And so there'll be regular checks that's at least foreseen by national authorities. And there'll be sanctions for non-compliance that can be burdensome, up to 4% of the annual turnover. Next slide, please. So this was supposed to be animated, but in the interest of time, let me just do this real quick. So there's a green statement here that says we are committed to reducing our carbon footprint. And I was going to ask you, do you think that the green statement is adequately formulated? The answer, I'll give it away, or it's already given away, is not really, because the statement, we are committed to reducing our carbon footprint, is relatively vague and generic. It has an unclear scope. It's making a future-oriented commitment, but without being time-bound. And it's actually unclear, is this a gross or net reduction in carbon? So really how to improve this statement is to be more specific. We are committed to reducing our company's CO2 production emissions by 25% by 2040 compared to 2020 levels. That way, a consumer understands what you're actually trying to say. Next slide, please. Diane.
Thank you. So I will say in the sort of the green space, the US is a little behind Europe. And we've seen that in other situations where Europe sort of leads in a lot, the EU leads in a lot of sort of more of the environmental protective type of claims and other spaces. But in the United States, we have a number of administrative agencies that would touch on the importation and imported as well as domestic products. And the Federal Trade Commission is one that really leads on green claims for all sorts of products, including textiles, as we heard earlier, but not just foods, and all consumer products would be reviewed by the Federal Trade Commission in terms of their advertising practices. So the FTC has really led on this issue in the United States. There are some states that are active as well, but for the most part, at the federal level, we're talking about the Federal Trade Commission. And the Federal Trade Commission issued green guides way back in 1992, the original set of green guides. And they really were focused primarily on recycling and renewable type claims. And again, all consumer products, not just food, drug, cosmetic products that are regulated by FDA, but any other products, including any electronics or textiles or anything else that would be a consumer advertising or a piece for consumer advertising. And since 1992, there's not been a tremendous amount of activity, particularly in the FDA regulated space, because they share jurisdiction with the Federal Trade Commission on these types of claims. However, as everyone knows, the technology, the change and advancements and innovation in technology has resulted in different consumer behavior, lots more interest in selling products, making claims in this space, and certainly companies with their mission statements really trying to lean in on these issues. And so the Federal Trade Commission has reacted to that. I'll go to the next slide. I've just listed here all the different actions. So in December, almost a year ago, well, I can't believe I'm saying that, but almost a year ago in December 2022, the Green Guide was revisited by the Federal Trade Commission. They asked for comment. What that means is they've asked industry, consumers, other governmental agencies, consumer watchdog groups to provide comments on a number of different issues. And what we're suggesting here is, and that's still open. I mean, the comment period is closed, but FDA is still reviewing these issues. So consumers were really focused on transparency. They were focused on, sustaining these marketing claims, substantiating sustainable claims, and not, sort of to Anna's point, having general blanket statements. What do those mean? And so there was a lot of input from consumers. There was a lot of input from businesses and organizations, and they've put comments in. They'd like to see more enforcement in this space. As I said, there hasn't been a lot of enforcement. It's been somewhat quiet while these green guides, and the green guides have been fairly narrow and not really broad. So I think we'll see these requests for more enforcement. Why do companies want more enforcement? Kind of weed out the bad actors. So there's the responsible companies that want to have an ability to make these claims, but not see others in the space doing something that is not welcome and makes it harder for them to do what they want to do. And more interaction and update from the Federal Trade Commission. So we had not only a public workshop where people came in and talked about recycling and other things, and then also this open comment period. And right now, FTC is reviewing those comments that I mentioned. And some of the other claims, next slide, some of the other claims, we're going to hold on that for a second. Some of the other claims are things like carbon offsets and climate change claims. So it's much broader than recycling and recyclable content. And things like compostable, degradable, ozone friendly, sustainable. All of those are words that FTC has said, we're seeing a lot of that in the marketplace. Somebody tell us what these mean, what you want us to regulate in this space. In the absence of having that federal regulation, what you will see are consumer product class actions. And Anna mentioned one earlier on. I didn't put slides together listing all these various different litigations. As you probably all know, the United States is very litigious. and plaintiffs can bring cases based on anything. And so you will find some exposure to these claims in the plaintiff's bar. But I'm focused primarily here on the regulators and what they would think of. And as I started out talking about, there's more than just the Federal Trade Commission who looks at products as they come into the United States. Customs gets a chance to take a look at them, and they rely on the expertise of the Federal Trade Commission or the Food and Drug, if we're getting into an FDA regulated product, to take a look at labels, claims, ingredients. If you have something that might have pesticides, we also have the Environmental Protection Agency, another agency that might be interested in looking at your product. So we have a lot of eyes on importation of products, including on this green space. So there will be more to come out of this. This is the beginning of a new look at more broad definitions around the green guides. And we will see how this plays out, but expect more regulation in this space from the federal government and then and guidance, and then expect that to sort of have to trickle down through the businesses and consumers to companies taking a relook at some of their materials. And the bottom line is claims cannot be false or misleading. And Anna mentioned this as well. And so you need to have support for any claim that you're going to make in any of these sort of green sustainable spaces. That's it for me. And we can go to this. We're going to pivot back to Anna.
Yeah, and I think maybe really the bottom line, as Diane was also saying, there is a lot coming, and this is something that from an EU perspective, and I think also from an US perspective, as Diane was just saying, it's key, a key goal of the legislators, of the regulators, to drive behavior through new legislation in this space. So it's interesting to watch, and it's a good time to be, you know, a lawyer and just following the developments in a world where you're really hoping for more sustainable businesses. So moving on to you know, less about ESG, more about like what is food law actually. So if you wanted to place, let's say, a food or a food supplement on the market in the EU first, and then later in the US. So I'll give a little bit of an introduction to that. As a first question to you, you've already been seeing it for a little while, is like, do you think that you will need to seek an authorization before placing a food or food supplement on the EU market? Interestingly, you think the answer is yes. Let me elaborate that, answer that question a little later. Next slide, please. Who do you think enforces food law in the EU? Regulators, competitors, competition protection agencies, all of the above? Okay, maybe we can move on, and I will provide the answers as I'm going through my slides. So what is food? Just so that we can set the scene. I guess it's self-explanatory. This is the definition under EU law on the screen. So food is basically anything that can be ingested or is expected to be ingested by humans. And then, of course, if you have a food, you know, then certain legislation applies, a certain framework, and we'll go into that now. If you don't have a food, if you, for example, have a medical device or feed or, you know, plants prior to harvesting, that's not included in food. And so a different legislative framework will apply. Next slide, please. In Europe, many of you have said, you know, you're not exporting yet. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think as you consider exporting into Europe or placing product on the market in Europe, these are some of the basics that you should be aware of. So the main regulation, the foundation really of food law is 178/2002. And it covers the entire agri-food sector, so from farm to fork, and all stages of production, processing, and distribution of food and feed. It aims at ensuring a high level of health protection and the effective functioning of the internal market. And it requires mainly that food, like the cornerstone is that food must be safe to be placed on the market. And if it's already on the market and you realize it's not safe, you must withdraw and recall. And this actually goes in line with our first question just now. So do you need an authorization to place food on the market? Is there someone who tests and checks that your food is safe prior to you placing it on the European market? And the answer is actually no. The primary responsibility in Europe for you, if you're placing food on the market, is, it's on you. You as the food business operator who's placing food on the market need to know if your food is safe, and it's in your hands to ensure that it is. And you do not receive an authorization or a license. For certain food, or generally you should notify the authorities that you're placing that product on the market, but there's no authorization process. And interestingly, here also I've been using this concept of placing on the market, or POTM. Placing on the market is not just, the physical concept of you taking a product and then actually selling it to a consumer and providing it to a consumer in Europe. It can be viewed as placing on the market already if you're in Kenya or in the US and you have a website, and on that website you address European citizens, or you add a German flag or a French flag, or you make it easy for for consumers to order food in euros in their own language. That shows that you're directing your commercial efforts toward the European market, and you can be viewed as placing your product on the market, and therefore you need to apply with European law. Next slide, please. So this is just the Article 14 of 178/2002. It says, food shall not be placed on the market if it is unsafe, or removed if it is unsafe. Next slide, please. To ensure that you are able to monitor your product after you've placed it on the market, you are supposed to have systems and procedures in place and you need to make sure you can trace your product through all stages of production. And you need to keep the public informed if something goes wrong. There's a right basically for the public to be informed if there's any issue. And that's done through the authorities, who of course check your products. Next slide, please. I realize we're running a little out of time, maybe. Milena, how much longer do we have?
We have in total until like 40 more minutes, but I would like to give us like a few 10 minutes at least at the end for questions.
Okay, so I'll keep it short, and you will receive these slides, and if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us. So yes, there's of course, you're responsible for placing food on the market and making sure it's safe, but of course there's checks and balances in place. There's responsible authorities to review the safety of the products. There's reporting systems to ensure the swift exchange of information relating to food. Next slide, please. And there's also lots of different standards that you need to apply, that you need to review and apply in order to assess that your food is safe and does deserve to be on the market, if you will. These include hygiene standards, laws with respect to maximum residue levels. So for example, make sure there's not too much chloride in your product. There's certain limits, even though chloride might be used for disinfecting facilities and etc. You still have to ensure that you abide by standards to reduce the chloride level as much as possible. And then there's also, we've been alluding to it also already in the green claims. With respect to green claims, there's of course regulations around you advertising for your products. And if you make any health claims related to your products, for example, this food supplement, this ingredient in this food supplement contributes to a healthy heart or something like that, it needs to be substantiated. it actually needs to be listed into what's called the health in the health claims register at EU level. So there's a lot to be aware of, a lot of different bells and whistles to be checking before making claims, in particular health claims. Next slide, please. I'm just going to quickly mention that there's also, if you have products of animal origin, for example, even I think vitamin, what was it, D? I think vitamin D is originally of animal origin. So there's specific rules that apply. And there's a whole set of laws that you need to navigate that's really not super easy to do as you enter into Europe. Next slide, please. I find this a very helpful overview of questions you may need to ask yourself as you enter the European market, place a product on the European market. So make sure you even classified your product correctly, notify the authorities, ensure that it's safe. Are you sure? Do you have all the documentation? Do you have an EU formulation, especially if you're placing food supplements on the market with different vitamins and minerals? You have to ensure that these are actually allowed and that you're following EU standards. I'm going to leave the rest for you to review after, but this is a very nice checklist for you to consider. Maybe one quick Q&A. So let's say company A places a food supplement on the market in the US. They have a food supplement that they manufactured in the US. They're placing it on the market in the US. And now, and I think we might have a Mentimeter question on this, following various requests from Germany, France, and Italy, company A includes a shipment option on their website for German, French, and Italian customers to order its food supplement. Is this considered as placing on the market in the EU? It could easily be viewed as being placed on the market. It is you trying to place your product on the market targeting EU customers. And so that requires certain steps, making sure you have an EU formulation, an EU label, etc. So be mindful of that. And I think shall we just, in the interest of time, leave it at that, and I'll pivot to Diane.
Sure. So Anna, before you pivot, there's one question about what's the role of the regulator? If food is already placed on the market, should food not be certified safe before being placed on the market? What's the position of that, regardless of the current position in the EU regulation? So you might want to just address how the regulator might enforce, and then I can do the same when I cover US.
Thank you, Diane. Sure, yes, and actually that would also respond to the earlier Mentimeter question. So indeed, as I mentioned, you don't need to have an authorization or license to place your product on the market, but you should register with the authorities, and that will allow the authorities to inspect you throughout the course of time. Of course, you might be at higher risk of being inspected if there's been any instances that put you on the agenda or on the radar of the regulators. How could that happen? Usually through competitors or competition enforcement authorities, which especially in Germany are very active. And they will look at, your competitors will look at what you are doing, and they will bring certain cases against you. They will send you what's called a cease and desist letter, meaning they are going to tell you in a real letter, they'll tell you, this is what I think you're doing wrong and stop doing that, or else I will take you to court. That is something that Europe has developed as a way to self-regulate the market, which actually means that competitors are, as I said, self-regulating the market, and authorities are really only enforcing laws, in more in situations where there's already been a lot of attention, or in regular inspections if something comes up. But the main risk at European level is really, and especially in Germany, competitors and consumer protection agencies monitoring what you're doing and sending you cease and desist letters, and if you don't comply, taking you to court.
Okay, great. And I see in the chat room some questions about whether this really covers more than food. I will do my best on my slides. Food will be the model, but I can talk about other FDA regulated products. And as I mentioned in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission, it doesn't matter. Any consumer product, if you're going to advertise, and a website can be advertising, you should be thoughtful of the FTC, and you should be thoughtful of your trade customs obligations to bring products into the market. And there was another question in the chat room about fertilizer. And so that is also some combination of our USDA, our United States Department of Agriculture, who has regulations on growing of crops or the feeding of animals, depending on whether the fertilizer is used also to grow crops for animals that we eat. And the Environmental Protection Agency, which I also mentioned, gets involved in pesticides and other things that would be on plants. So you should think about a couple of these different administrative agencies as well. Right now, I'm going to pivot to the Food and Drug Administration, which is part of our U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And again, it covers the safety and efficacy of drugs, biologics, medical devices, including over-the-counter medical devices, everything from dental floss and toothbrushes to heart valves. Conventional foods, including nutritional supplements and medical foods, and cosmetics. And there's a whole new world on cosmetics coming our way because we're going to have a lot more regulation after a law that was passed last December in the United States, whereas cosmetics used to be very low regulated, not regulated very expansively by the FDA, although there was some regulation. There now is a lot more regulation on that category of products starting. Actually, we just got 2 recent guidance. Next slide. And in the United States, what's tricky is that our classifications, those product categories I just mentioned, are based upon the intended use, and that is what you say about the product. So you have to be very careful about your statements about your product. So if you are claiming to cure, treat, mitigate disease, you're going to be in the disease in the drug bucket, and that's a whole set of regulations that's very different than foods. If you're just for nutrition, taste, aroma. If you're a dietary supplement, you're intended to supplement the diet, and you could talk about certain ways of doing that through structure function claims. But if those structure function claims cross the line into something where you're curing, treating, mitigating disease, you will get thrown into the drug bucket, and the drug bucket has much more rigorous regulation, including pre-approval. So it's really important to think about what your objective and express and implied intent is around the distribution of your product before you start bringing it to the United States, because customs and FDA will both be looking, and FDA may or may not pull that one particular product, but they have the authority to, and they can look at your labels, labeling, website material, other promotional material. And again, the Federal Trade Commission would pivot over on advertising and claim substantiation. But from a product positioning perspective, you have to be really thoughtful about what you're saying your product does. Another overlap I'll give you in case there are people in the beauty space or the cosmetic space is if your cosmetic is intended to beautify, promote attractiveness, that's okay. But if you're going to cure cancer or cure age spots or remove wrinkles, you've now crossed the line, okay? And then you're going to be looked at as a drug or a medical device, depending, and FDA will hold you to a much more rigorous, probably pre-clearance or pre-approval standard. Next slide. So focusing on food, because I think that we thought that was our focus, food is defined as something that is food or drink, chewing gum, articles used for that. We also had a lawsuit and a case that said, okay, that's not a very helpful definition. Give us more. And so the more is taste, aroma, or nutritive value. So if you're coming into the food industry in the United States, you really got to be thinking about taste, aroma, nutritive value, not about cure, treat, mitigate disease, and not even really about impacting structure or function of the body, although you can make some claims of that. We have no pre-approval of the actual food. However, ingredients have to be established as safe. So you have to make sure that your ingredients, if you've got a composition of a food that's made up of a number of different things, that you have established safety. And you do that oftentimes through either something called a food additive petition or GRAS. And I have a slide on this. And your big bucket authorities are not adulterated or misbranded. Next slide. And those big phrases apply to all the product categories that FDA regulates. So again, if you're in cosmetics or OTC drugs or medical devices or foods or supplements or medical foods, you've got to think about both adulteration and misbranding. That's how FDA challenges you if you're on the US market or if you're coming through customs. And adulteration is more than just what's in it, it's also how it's manufactured. You have to have good manufacturing practices that are met. You have to have those safe ingredients that I mentioned, and you have to be very thoughtful about your formulation and whether it's truly a food or a dietary supplement. Misbranding is everything you say about the product. You have to make sure your labels and your labeling are not false or misleading in any way. That's graphics, that's charts, those numbers, all of that FDA would look at to make sure that your products are not misbranded. They also have a lot of requirements for exactly what must be on a product, whether you're a food or a supplement, and those labels look different. Whether you're a cosmetic, those will be coming. There's more regulation coming. You have to go look at those and make sure that the affirmative things that you must say are done the way FDA wants you to say them in the US English language, and that your voluntary statement, your claims, and your other fun things that you want to say about your statement, about your product, are consistent with not being false or misleading in any particular. And there's a whole laundry list of prohibited acts that FDA has where they come after you. Next slide. And I'm not looking at the chat or the Q&A, but I promise I will right towards the end. So food safety is really where FDA spends its resources. And that would be true also on cosmetics. And it would be true also on dietary supplements or medical foods or over-the-counter drugs and devices. Really, if there's a safety concern, you will see action from the FDA, more so than if it's just a miss on the claims or a miss on the label statements or your format. But if it goes to safety, you might see FDA enforcement. And how does FDA go about it in the food space? Your facilities are required to be registered, not a pre-approval, but a registration. And you tell FDA what foods those are. After 9/11, which was yesterday, many years ago in the United States, FDA and Congress realized we had no idea where the foods in our United States of America were housed. And so they required registration. It was the fastest set of rulemaking I've ever seen happen in the United States. And it required registration, and even for those warehouses where you hold it. Safety requirements are also include that food manufacturing, good manufacturing practices. And now we have this additional layer of something called hazard analysis and risk-based preventative controls, where you really have to be thoughtful about what's going on at your manufacturing facility, identifying where those hazards are, putting preventative controls in all those places during manufacturing where you might introduce a new ingredient or you might switch to new equipment. You have to be thoughtful about identifying those and putting in preventative controls in a food safety plan, and pressure testing those all the time. And the effort there is because FDA is very concerned that in the United States, we were much more reactive rather than proactive with our food safety. They want everybody to be more proactive. They want you to be thoughtful. And this applies to facilities registered outside the United States. And yes, FDA can go to those facilities and they can inspect those facilities or ask the local authorities to inspect on their behalf. And they do. There's maximum pesticide residues. EPA, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, will set the pesticide residues. FDA enforces them. So again, we have a lot of overlap in different jurisdictional authorities, but if you've got something where you've got pesticides, you have to be thoughtful about that. At one point, we were getting orange juice coming on boats from Brazil, and they were using a pesticide we had last year said was no longer acceptable on citrus fruit, and we held on the boats all this orange juice. And so you don't want to be caught up in something like that where you have an aha moment, and that was not even really their fault. It was a change in our laws. We have things called a reportable food registry. If you find out there's a food compromise or food safety issue that could result in significant likelihood of serious human harm, you have to tell FDA within 48 hours. You have to report it into something called a reportable food registry. So they're not waiting weeks for you to decide whether there's a public harm out there and then chase food. FDA has recall authority. It used to not be mandatory. It's not mandatory across the board. They just got it as a mandatory power for cosmetics under that new law I mentioned, and it does exist for FDA food now in that serious, that most rigorous food registry type concern. Lots of record keeping, lots of inspection authorities. Next slide. Again, product composition. We have things called standards of identity. And that's something where if you are going to call something milk or chocolate or some dairy term or a particular type of cheese, you have to go to the regulations and make sure you meet it. You have to get your food additives approved unless they are generally recognized as safe, which is an industry standard. Everyone would sort of agree they are, and then they notify to the FDA. And packaging is really important. And as people are coming up with really interesting, innovative green packaging, that's now become more of an interest to FDA as well, because you have to make sure if you're using, recycled pulp or fibers in your packaging, you're thoughtful about whether that causes any concern, the ingredients leaching to the food. So FDA does touch on packaging, but they've streamlined and made that process quite a bit easier these days. Next slide, because I'm being told to wrap up, so I'm going to be really quick. This is your list of labeling and packaging requirements. There's a reg on each one of these things. Similarly, if you're a cosmetic or you're an OTC drug or you're a dietary supplement, there's a laundry list that looks an awful lot like this. You have to be really thoughtful about these required elements. Use of the term organic is USDA, and that was in the question chat room, so I want to just cover that really quickly now. So USDA has, as part of our organic food program, a huge regulation on when you can use the term organic and can you get certification from third-party certifying organization, many that are ex-US, and yes, you can. So to answer that question in the chat room, and to just address this, you can use organic, provided you have that certification and it's meeting our USDA organic standards, and those apply to cosmetics, even though it came under the food law. If you're going to use the term organic, they would expect you to be meeting those same standards, even though the law itself applies to food. I think my next slide that's FSMA, our new law. I kind of touched on that already, okay? But that is really where food safety is very active right now. And there are, for imported products, those second to last and third to last bullets for supplier verification program. In the domestic space, you got to make sure that your suppliers are up to the same standards as the United States. And that's very rigorously enforced now. It's a paper inspection, not where they show up at your facility, but they have for documentation to ensure that suppliers of foreign food products meet our standards. And you do that through paperwork and auditing and being really cautious about their food safety manufacturing. Some importers are qualified already under this voluntary qualified importer program. So that's a good, interesting way to think about getting on that. That streamlines your importation through the United States customs border. And there's all these enhanced domestic and foreign governmental agents working together. Next slide. We don't have to talk about FTC already. We pivoted, but they also do more than just the green guides. Next slide. They are thoughtful about any claims, not just green claims, but any structure or health related claims. They have a new guidance out from December 2022. It goes to all products, not just dietary supplements. It was drafted originally for dietary supplements, goes out to all products. And they sent a bunch of letters to companies saying, we mean it. You guys have to be thoughtful and have substantiation for all your claims. And so that's where we are now with FTC. Last slide is really just a reset on our human foods program at the Food and Drug Administration. I'll leave with this. We're having a new revamping of foods, which will give a lot more oversight. And that was in large part because of the infant formula debacle over here, which I'm sure many of you heard. And so we will have a new human foods program in the United States, which means more oversight and thought about our human food supply. And similarly, the cosmetics set built up. Okay, I'm going to be done, and so we can go to questions. And I tried to answer a few that I saw earlier.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you very much, also, Anna, for this very insightful and packed presentation. One of the questions which always came up, and one of the questions I can answer, no worries, we will send the slides and also the recording, so you'll be able to kind of review it again, to also look at the checklist Anna mentioned. So this will be coming into your inbox soon. So no worries on this regard, but there have been also other questions which I'm not able to answer, and I will give the floor to you back. One of the questions which came is, does an organic fertilizer fall also under the food legislation?
Yeah, I mentioned that in my presentation. It's really EPA and USDA in the United States, and I don't know if Anna knows that over in the EU, because sometimes it's not our typical FDA. It's USDA on growing of crops, and it's EPA if there's pesticidal issues you've got to think about.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then another question which came up is, what would be the role of the regulator if food is already placed in the market?
Right.
Should food not be
Yes.
certified? Yeah, you have seen the question?
Yeah, Anna answered that at the end of hers, and I guess I didn't address it, but FDA, I mentioned recall authority. First of all, customs would probably block it, so it may not get through. But if it does get through and it's violative of our laws, and this is any FDA regulated and even FTC, there are authorities for them to go after a product in the market through requests for a recall. There's something called a warning letter over here. So they could start with that saying, your product is not compliant because of A, B, C, and D. And then you have to, within 15 days, respond to FDA. So it might be correspondence like that. If it's a serious harm, you might be asked by the regulator to recall your product, to get it off the market. They have that authority to ask, and they have, in certain situations, I mentioned the authority to mandate.
Uh-huh. So this question also went on your personal opinion, if you have any, if you think this is actually the right way to deal with it, that there is no need for a certified or certificate in this regard. Do you think something will change in this moving forward from the EU, or is this kind of like common practice law-wise?
Yeah, I think this has been pretty established and working reasonably well in the EU. I don't think short term there's any push to change it, because there's so many different food products and food supplements that I don't even know if the authorities would be able to handle the masses that they would need to authorize. But I do think that there are ways, or there's a strive to be a stronger enforcer and to have more rules around what safety is, and to crack down on companies that are placing product on the market in Europe and that is not safe. So there's more media attention, there's more enforcement for sure in the last few years. So maybe on that scale, we'll see differences. But I don't think the law itself is going to change anytime soon in how this is approached. Yeah. Diane? Okay.
There was also, so in the US, a certificate is not going to get you anything unless you're one of those foreign suppliers that are verified, but that's really only the food space. So I know customers may ask for that, but people in the United States should be doing their homework on bringing food in or other products in. And I'm not sure that I would argue, as I look at documentation that would support a product coming in, that a certificate, it depends on what it is. But if it's from the other government saying this is manufactured according to, blah, 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 and that's compliant with our US requirements, maybe that would work. But that's not how it gets really done here. There was a question about GMOs, and I think when I talked about the green claims and US sort of tagging along behind EU, that's another area where we have as well. I think we're a little more open there to GMO type claims, and GMO being in our products. That's regulated again, both this overlap. So it's FDA and USDA, because it could be how you're handling a plant pest, or how you're handling something in the ag space, so that's USDA, and then FDA would see it in the finished products with a claim. And again, they don't love GMO free because they don't think there's anything wrong with GMOs. And so they don't love this whole implication by the claim that there's something wrong with it, because they haven't found it to be unsafe, FDA. And so you'll see we have a guidance in the FDA space about what you can say and how you can phrase it. And they're allowing them, and there's not a ton of enforcement around it, but they have said they really prefer other nomenclature than GMO and GMO free.
I see.
And no, Anna, you might have a thought in the EU.
Not on GMOs right now.
Yeah, okay.
No, maybe on that, some questions have been also really around testing and testing facilities, both in the US or in the EU, how to actually go forward on this. But one question was really on what are the measures, the international market requirements they have put in place in terms of product testing. Particular Africa face serious challenge in terms of food testing.
I'll chime in on it really depends on where you are in the stream of commerce, right? So if they mean by food testing to make sure it doesn't have contaminants or lead or some other microorganisms impacting the product, if you're in the United States and you're bringing raw materials into the United States that you're going to incorporate into a food product here, you have to establish and watch some of that testing. And so some testing should be done. If you are a finished product and you've taken care of those issues ex-US, the importer should make sure that they are thinking about what testing has been done and is it good enough. And then it should be able to come in a finished product having already been tested there and not be tested here. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question, because a lot of it does depend on the facts and who is doing what, and whether you're talking about testing raw materials versus finished product. If you're talking about efficacy testing and substantiation for some kind of claim, that's second and apart. And that's on your responsibility. That's on your back to make sure it gets done before you make a claim. That's different than establishing that your product's not going to cause harm here, that it's a safe food product. And if that's the kind of testing you're talking about, you do have to do it. And there's some level of it, although FDA is not, doesn't have every food, here's what you must do kind of guidance.
Yeah, it's really the same in Europe. I think it is very fact specific, but I think I mentioned briefly that there are lots and lots of rules to navigate. And of course, there's certain standards set. And so, if there is an inspection or, at customs, there's questions, then you need to be able to demonstrate how you've ensured that you're staying within the limits. Hopefully that does answer the question.
Thank you. Maybe looking at the time, there's time for one last question, which popped up, which was more about the beginning of the presentation you had regarding ESG. So in your experience, have US MNCs been held liable by US courts for ESG-related damages or malpractice outside US borders, especially in Global South economies where they might have offshore operations?
I have no idea. No idea. I'd have to look into that. Sorry.
No problem. Anna, can you say something? No, it's EU related.
No.
Yes. Okay. Good. Then a lot of questions have been also on mentorship and guidance on becoming compliant. Maybe this is another element where you kind of maybe could share resources. Doesn't need to be now, but we can include them later on into kind of the email we sent out to all participants with the slides and the recording, but also to kind of highlight again, if you are becoming a member of the YEE community, we do offer mentorship in a more broader way for your businesses with experienced people and through partners like Sidley and so on. I also would like to ask now Diana to come in soon to share kind of like the program where potentially could get additional guidance from Sidley. They are offering for young enterprises in the world. But let's give a big shout out both to Anna and Diane for this wonderful presentation and giving these really technical insights on this. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to give us a bit of your expertise and insight on this. I learned a lot today, and I'm sure that a lot of the participants did too. So thank you very much, and over to you, Diane.
Hi, Milena. Hi, everyone. What a great session. I think it was the perfect combination of inspiration with the conversation with Agnes and also very hands-on, practical, technical advice by my colleagues, Anna and Diane. I'll be very, very brief in the interest of time. First, I want to thank Milena and the whole ITC and WIPO teams for this collaboration. And like Milena was mentioning, we at Sidley Austin have an pro bono program, which is called the Emerging Enterprises Pro Bono Program, which means that we provide free legal services, free international legal services to companies that are based or have operations in developing countries and have very clear social and or environmental contributions and work towards the realization of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So if you would like direct specific legal advice for your company by experts for example, Diane or Anna on many different legal subjects, feel free to check out our website that I will share in the chat, or also write me an email and I would be more than happy to explain our application process and our eligibility criteria. And yeah, that's all from me. I'll give it back to Milena, and thank you again to ITC and to the entire team for this collaboration.
Thank you, Diane, for presenting again the options your company is offering. And I've heard already so many times from companies who took over this office and managed to get part of it that they benefit really a lot from it, because all of these legal questions are really tricky for non-legal people usually. So thanks for this opportunity. And I want, before we wrap up, take again this opportunity to remind everyone this is a webinar series. This one has been the third one. We had already great attendance. And the last one will also be on voluntary sustainability standards to really like show you, okay, what can actually your business also benefit from? We have heard there's a lot of demand from consumers around the world, especially in the US and in the EU market for more sustainable products. We heard from Agnes today about different type of materials, but how can you actually also prove to the customer that this is a product you can trust in? So if you're interested in that, please join us next time, which is on the 26th of September. And I also want to encourage everyone again to join the YAY community to keep be updated about opportunities. We're having trainings and so on. And also we're going to have soon an opportunity to get a certificate on getting a climate sensitive business and building into a sustainable enterprise. So there you can actually get a lot of insights from it, but also a proper certificate where you can prove that you have been part of this program. So that just as a reminder, I want to thank everyone who joined today. And before we're leaving, I would like to ask everyone who has been part of this team today to switch on the cameras, and because we are a big team also behind making this all possible, so that we have one joint group picture for all of us before we are leaving this session. Agnes, if you're still around, feel free to switch on your camera. And then, perfect. Wilson, if you can take the picture. All right. Okay, that was taken. Okay, one more time, I think. Okay.